you see Hello.
Hello, Nikolai. Yeah, hello. So, very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, physically and online, distinguished friends of pharma, biotech, and EU industry and innovation. My name is Ondřej Knotek, member of the European Parliament, member of the Renew Group, and member of the ALDE. And I have a privilege to moderate today's timely debate, the future of medicinal innovations in Europe, with special subtitle: How can better regulation and digitalization contribute to have more innovations in Europe and to deliver on patient needs. First of all, I would like to thank the ALDE, the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats, for Europe to host us here in their or our headquarters. ALDE is organizing a chain of business related events, and today we are now to discuss the biotech and innovations. It is a very timely debate, as I suppose all of you know. I'm in charge to moderate, but the more important and most important colleagues are on the panel. So I would like to welcome Magda Chelbus, sitting to my right. Magda is Executive Director of the EFPIA, which is European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations. As well online, it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Katrin Weil, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at Bristol Myers Squibb. Hello, Katrin. Pleasure to have you here online. And as well online, we have Dr. Nikolai Brun, the Chief Medical Officer at Affibody AB. Nikolai, greetings. Many thanks for being here with us. And now to set a scene a little bit. So we have had the pandemics. We have had the situation, the war in Ukraine, resulting into energy crisis, and much more. It is spelled not only in the corridors of European Parliament, but across Europe, that Europe shall become much more self-sufficient. The strategical autonomy, or at least open strategical autonomy, is a topic. And it's related not only to energies, raw materials, steel, chemicals, but as well, and of course, indeed, to pharmaceutics, to medicines, or at least to the active ingredients that basically cause the healing effect. And it's clear because it's about to deliver to our patients, but as well, it is an important segment of our European economy, offering qualified jobs, enormous innovative potential, and as well high-tech technologies. And if we see this new geopolitical setup asking for being much more self-sufficient, and we look on the trend, we have here a gap, unfortunately. And the data, I don't have it on charts, but it's known. Simply other successful markets, mainly US and Southeast Asia, and as well Israel, they are faster. If there are molecules invented in Europe, often then follow-up value chain and monetization is not getting on in Europe. There are much more investments in US when it comes to biotech and pharma business, and this is a gap that is now recognized and perhaps is about to be addressed. European Commission proposed set of legislation, mainly the big revision of the pharmaceutical package, and, for example, the European health data space. And now we are getting to our debate and to our panel, because we would like to have the answer if the proposed steps are going in good direction, if they will be sufficient to, let's say, increase the affordability of medicines to our European citizens, will maintain Europe as an attractive place to live and also competitive in terms of technologies and economy globally. So I would like to raise a first question, general question to all of three our panelists. What is, let's say, how do you see the impact of the legislation proposed now on the innovation in Europe? Are we able to close the gap that we are now having? Are we on a good track? I would like to now, as a benefit for being here, give the first floor to Magda. Magda, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me here today. And just a disclaimer, I'm not only in charge of science and regulatory affairs at EFPIA, I'm also on my spare time member of the board of the Children Tumor Foundation, which is a patient-led research charity. And we are working with them to bring research to Europe for rare diseases. And it's super, super complicated. So are we closing the gap? I think we must close the gap. I think that's the first item, because I think what matters really to all of us is that we are not only driven by today's problems and resolving today's problems. We need to project ourselves in 20, 30 years' time, because this is what this legislation is for, is to give signals to everybody to invest in research and development of new health solutions that would be necessary and that would be developed in 10, 20, 30 years. So that's the signal that we are waiting for. That's the predictability, that's the certainty that all players in the research ecosystem are looking for. And when I'm saying research ecosystem, I'm not talking only about big pharma or SMEs. I'm talking really about everyone in the research ecosystem. These are academia and regulators and patients and big and small companies. This is the ecosystem. They all need that certainty, because development of medicines and translation of fantastic science that Europe has today into new products would only happen if we have that ecosystem working, and each and every player in that ecosystem being present in Europe, including those big companies that would continually invest. Now, your question is about whether the legislation that we have today on the table would help closing that gap and bringing more research and development into Europe. There are many components that would help achieving that goal. The regulation, the legislation that we are talking about, it's one of the key elements of that, but we shouldn't forget, we must not forget also about clinical trials, about chemical legislation, about environmental legislations, everything else. This is all connected. That's the legislative ecosystem that can make it or break it in terms of the future of research, development, and manufacturing of medicines in Europe. So let's look more specifically at the legislation, at the pharmaceutical legislation, pharmaceutical package. The intent is absolutely fantastic. You know, being the European Commission said multiple times, we would like to see a balance between supporting innovation in Europe and supporting patient access in Europe. Now, in practice, I think what we see is that there are some components in these legislations which would indeed help achieving the goal of making Europe more competitive from the regulatory point of view. But then we see many elements that would unfortunately might undermine that and could send signals of uncertainty rather than certainty to future investors. So I would say today we are at a crucial turning point where we can make these things right and make sure that we restore that balance and help closing the gap, attracting clinical trials, attracting continued investments of big and small players in Europe in R&D.
Many thanks for your initial answer, and you mentioned as well the academics. You mentioned R&D, and this is absolutely crucially important. Member states are now really having a challenge to invest 2%, for example, of the GDP to the army, at the same time invest into the research, and it's not always an easy decision. However, without academics, without talented people, we will have a serious issue. Many thanks for this. And now I would like to pass the floor to Catherine with the same question for the beginning. So, how do you see the impact of the proposed direction of changes on the innovative environment in Europe? Catherine, over to you.
So thanks again for the opportunity. So I also wanted to, and I've been working at BMS for a long time, 30 years in fact, but I also want to talk about my background as a physician. So what matters to me is really the health of patients, and that's why I chose this path in the pharma industry. I work in academia too, but in the pharma industry, and I realized that that was the path to go to reach more patients. So in my current role, I oversee the regulatory side of Europe, but not only Europe now. I'm also responsible for regulatory activities around more than 60 markets around the world, not US, not China, not Japan, but all the other ones. And you can appreciate the collaboration that are in place in those markets. And that's why it's even more important to put Europe at the forefront. You know, there's a lot that is happening outside of Europe, but we want to stay in Europe. You know, for me, I've been living in Belgium and I've been working at BMS for the past 30 years. I can tell you it's really the health of the citizen of Europe that matters. So everything you said, Magda, is exactly that. I mean, we are an ecosystem in Europe. What we've noticed about, you know, from the past years, but also for acute now, is the stress of the system. So of course we welcome the legislation, the legislative changes, of course, for simplification. But because of the stress of the system, we see it happening because of the complexity of the implementation of the clinical trial regulation, because some of the legislation are not aligned, you know, the medical device with the clinical trials, the demand on the GMO that are totally valid but not aligned again with the request and the requirement for the other part of the clinical trial legislation. So many things that can be simplified and can be helpful because it does start with investing in clinical trials. And you know that, you know, at the member state level, the health agencies are organized like that. You start with clinical trial and you continue the knowledge of the product. But that's start with that. And if we lose that, that's terrible. So we all make a lot of effort, of course, to have the clinical trial regulation work. But you know, simplification is more than welcome. What I also want to stress is because of all this complexity and because of the fast pace of the technology and the scientific evolution, we need to be ready for the future. This is absolutely what you said, Magda. We need to be ready for future, and that's why we need to keep the flexibility of the regulatory network. We cannot imagine what kind of drug will be developed. You know, you see the development in the past 10 years only. Even oncology, because I'm specialized in oncology. So honestly, I can talk about oncology at length. It is a revolution. It is. We were all together. We spent years learning together the mechanism of action, the impact on the patient, how to manage the tolerability. But these are concepts where you need the engagement of all stakeholders, of course, academia, but of course, I have a lot of credit for all the regulators we've been working with. They invested a lot of effort together. We learned about all this. But what's the problem? Maybe microbiome is the target to cure everybody, but the legislation does not allow to address that. This is not, you know, if we continue to speak about only a specific area that we know, not thinking about the flexibility for the future, we may lose all this innovation, and that is the risk. Honestly, that is the risk. The other plea I have, and as you said, Magda, there's plenty of good things in this proposal, but there's an area about the focus on unmet medical need that could be seen as really too restricted. And this is my plea because, you know, medical need has to take into account the patient view. It has to take into account any improvements for patients for managing their into an era, into a disease, into a population, it cannot be only in a population that have nothing. It has to be also when we think we're going to improve what is already there. And I mean, for me, this connotation is essential. And we cannot limit. We have to find a way to recognize the innovation that we brought to patients in that sense. And of course, with all the all big changes in technology, as mentioned, we need to learn together to be there. I mean, the whole development in digital, we need to be together in that, and that will help prioritize the work. Because I'm very conscious of what you said about, the choice that member states have to make into investing their resources. But honestly, I'm a strong believer that if we start with a common agreement on where to invest, where to develop, and where to go to the benefit of the patient, yeah, we can be there. Thank you.
Many thanks for your introductory remarks. You mentioned a very huge number of very important and interesting points. One of them, you want to stay in Europe, I noted, and it fully corresponds to words of one vice president of one pharma company I had chance to meet in early October, and the sentence was, or the message was clear. We are patriots. We really do not want and we do not plan to, let's say, close any assets in Europe. But in terms of new investments, of course, the stakeholders, they decide based on the data and not based on emotions. And this is what you have clearly as well underlined. You mentioned also the flexibilities and things like that. We will get to it, but in the later debate. But now to Nikolai, Brun, the same starting question. So where do you see where we are? Are we going a good direction? What's the future of innovations? Nikolai, over to you.
And thank you for the invitation. I'm the chief medical officer at Affibody, which is based at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. But I also hold a professorship of regulatory science at the University of Copenhagen. So the academic view that we just heard about is very dear to my heart. I think that there are certain comments I can make to the proposal from an academic point of view that I'd like to bring forward. But I also just in disclosure, I was working as a regulator. I was the chief medical officer at the Danish Medicines Agency and one of the two co-chairs of the big European big data task force, where we looked at the use of real-world data and real-world evidence for the purposes of developing drugs in Europe. So the reports that were published by the big data task force the two co-authors. But I think that looking at this proposal, I agree with Catherine. I think there are a lot of good intentions in it. I think that one of the third sort of goal that the Commission states is that they want to continue to offer an attractive and innovation-friendly environment for research, development, and production of medicines in Europe. And I think that's an admirable goal. I certainly share it, but I'm not really sure that the present version of the proposal will achieve that. I agree with you two who made it to the room that there is a gap right now between Europe and the US. One of the metrics of that is clearly the amount of clinical trials that are being conducted in Europe. That's going down. A lot of trials are being conducted in Asia. That's a new thing. We haven't seen that before so much. And of course, a lot of trials are being done in the US. In the US, there's obviously a different system, different reimbursement system that can prove attractive, and that's why many countries choose to launch in the US first, I guess. One of the other things is for the development purposes is that they have ready access to claims data, real-world data that can guide the clinical development of the new compound. That can be purchased in the US. In Europe, we don't have that access. Perhaps we shouldn't have it. One of the things that we're addressing in the data task force reports. But my main point today really is that I see a lack of analysis, a lack of a sort of academic scrutiny for looking at what are we basing on our decisions on. So what are the data that is driving these proposals? So what is driving the decline in the number of clinical trials in Europe? What is driving the decline, the widening gap between Europe and US and Asia? And once we have identified that, then we can start to act on it. We should not put the cart before the horse. We should not propose actions until we've analyzed what is driving this. And I think it's hard to see the evidence base that has been used for the current proposals. They clearly anticipate the proposal, but how sure can we be that the effect will be what the proposed changes outline? It's a very major change, especially when it comes to market exclusivity. Putting on my other hat, representing small biotech, launching in 27 EU member states is no small feat. You can't do that as a small biotech. Only very large companies can do that. You can contract with someone or you can sell your asset. But is that what we want for Europe? Don't we want this forest of small developing entrepreneurial biotechs that gradually feed into large entities? And I'm not sure that's what we're seeing here. So I would love to see some more academic rigor in the proposals that are coming out. I would love to see that there's more scrutiny. What do we know? How do we? What don't we know? How do we get that knowledge? What can we do to react on that knowledge and then design the proposal? And I don't really see that. So very top line feedback on this, but I look forward to discussing it.
Many thanks for your honest words, and this is the reason why we are here to say things as we see them, not only to say yes, because as you mentioned, the knowledge-based policy making. I'm afraid that in few past years, and not only in our sector but as well in other sectors, there were too many ideological ambitions and not enough data, not enough knowledge-based decisions, and as some sectors, and it's more now, for example, on the climate, were like, okay, we will say yes. Then for some time, the European Commission had the idea that simply they are doing things right. But in last year, from all different sectors, it's really 360 degrees. We receive feedback, okay, ambitions are fine, but some of the legislations put in place are not at all always realistic, and we must now think, reshuffle, and readjust. And it's, I would say, maybe a good positive message that there was a small delay in this package, that we still have chance to let's say go on, and with the new policymakers, maybe with more feet on the ground, we will be able to speak more with industries, speak more with academics, because what I hear almost on daily basis, this has not been the case. You mentioned the real world evidence, real world data. The European health data space is now on the table in the parliament, and the debate is really complicated. I mean, all understand that the data must be protected, the human data, personal data, but without the specific data, the secondary usage of the data without the access to the data, we won't be able to compete with China, with US, that are far in front of us. So it is real hot and realistic debate. You started also one topic that I had on the agenda as a second point, and this is one of the cornerstone of the proposal, at least when it comes to the debate, and this is these are the incentives through data protection, through market protection, also to be a little bit fair to Commission, because I just don't want to blame. They are also trying to find a balance between the innovators and generic producers. Of course, both are important for delivering to the patient needs. But you mentioned that having making sure that the access will be in all member states, is it complicated because you don't have it in your hands? I fully agree. Also, you mentioned that the clarity with reduction of the years may not be the best way how to attract the investors. So this was my reading of your answers to this point, and now I would like to ask the same topic to our other guests. How do you see it? This proposed original 8+2. Now we have 6+2 with additional conditionalities, but not at all in the hands of the investors. So how do you see it, Magda?
Thank you for the question. I think it's really an important one, because this is where the confusion comes, and the Commission is trying to resolve a real problem by using the wrong solution. So I think access is indeed super important. Access in all member states as quickly as possible, no doubt. Why would we do medicines if they weren't reaching the patients in the end? I mean, that would be a nonsense. It would be an art for the art and not healthcare. So access is super important, but connecting it to the signal to investor to invest without giving them the possibility to actually regain those years. And today, clearly, access to all 27 member states markets, it's not something that it's in the hands of industry. The decisions for that access do not lie in our hands. Is not the right link. It's not the right connection. It's not going to even resolve all problems, because not all products would rely on regulatory data protection as last line of defense. So actually, the problem is real. The solution that the Commission proposes is what Nikolai said, undermining the signal for investors for the future. The only thing that Europe had that was a competitive advantage versus other regions was regulatory data protection. That was the thing that worked. And by the way, did it work? Yes. In combination with the pediatric legislation, with the orphan drug legislation and regulatory data protection, resulted in development of hundreds of products in Europe and placing them on the market for the benefit of patients. So why do we undermine something that it's really essential for small companies, for big companies, for startups, and connecting that to something that is not in our hands and we cannot do? So I think we as EFPIA and our members have made a commitment to go to markets and file for reimbursement within 2 years from the marketing authorization. It's a real commitment. A portal is being put in place where the information can be tracked and seen. That is in our hands. We can go and file. But not even that. You cannot file at the same time in all countries, because people are asking us, why does it take so long? Well, it takes so long because some countries require you to have your price set in 5 or 10 other countries before you can file. You cannot go to all markets at the same time. So asking in the legislation to connect something to something that it's not in our hands, and at the same time sending the signal that you would never recoup that lost year of protection isn't a good signal. I think, as I said, we need to reflect on why is it important that research is taking place here in Europe. That first of all, this is for the patient. So that signal to investors, come and do here your clinical trials, your research and development, your collaboration with the academia. I think that's really important. So I'd like to stop here, but that's about regulatory data protection. But just maybe for the next items on our agenda, it's not just about the incentives and predictability. It's also about future-proofing to make Europe competitive. It's also about simplification and optimization, because we are wasting time and resources, and it is about a very well-resourced regulatory network and capability in Europe in order to make Europe really, truly competitive, so that people say, okay, Europe is the first place I come to register to authorize my drug.
And the citizens that Europe is the first place where to live. At the end,
That's exactly the case. I think,
work
people sometimes say, why does that matter? Can't we just buy the drug from the US or from other countries? Why do we need to do that here in Europe? Well, for patients, having access to clinical trials in Europe is sometimes the only chance of quick fix and health improvement. So if we always have to go to UK, Switzerland, US, China more and more for our clinical trials, that's not helping us. So we really need to think about why does that matter that we do research here, and how do we do to attract this research here?
Thank you very much. Now, Catherine, over to you. How do you see it with the data protection, market protection, additional incentives?
Honestly, I don't have much to add because, this is what we discussed. It's how to keep I mean, each marketing authorization holder, each industry, we all have global development. So it's easy to pick and choose. It is. But if there's a commitment to EU citizens, I have this discussion with, my senior leaders all the time. Are we serious about staying in Europe? What are the, do we see Europe as still continuous investment? And it is. It is not some, and a region in the world that we want to dismiss at all. But as you said, Magda, sometimes we see the only opportunity because the access hurdle is so high. The only opportunity is really to open clinical trials, and we want to continue on that. But of course, there's this Helsinki agreement. You open clinical trials, but you want to continue the investment and having the drug commercially available for patients. So for me, and I only work in pregnancy, but I'm very aware of the challenges, which is the access challenges. Yes, we have the UNITA initiative coming in place. Yes, we want to have more alignment and easier access to patients, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet at all. And that is creating the gap, in fact, to the investment in Europe. Because, yes, there's a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of ways where the value of a medicinal product seems to be quantified in certain ways, and that is not always, the way that, there's only one way to assess the value of a product, and that's why it's important that there's discussion with main stakeholders.
Many thanks. Nikolai, would you like to add?
I think that it's so true what Magda said is that we need to look at what the intended effect is and what the actual effect is of the proposal. There is clearly an intention with the proposals that they think there will be a certain effect. Do we know this will be the effect of the proposal? No. Could we do something to get closer to investigating what the actual effect would be of the proposal? The tools that the Commission are using are clearly decentralized tools that they have at their disposal. And they may or may not be adequate for solving the current issue. Some of them are national, and when you are talking about exclusivity and you're talking about access, there is an access problem. Everyone agrees with it. There is not the same amount of medicines available in all countries. That's also very much driven by reimbursement. We know that the reimbursement systems are national. They are very different. People have different tax systems in different European countries, and social benefits are different. But can you solve that with an exclusivity proposal? I don't think so. I think it's the wrong tool of solving this problem. I think we can all agree the problem is there and it should be solved, but I'm not sure this is the right tool to do it. And I would love to see some more academic thinking in what do we know when we put proposals forward and what would be their effect. I talked to a representative from an orphan drug, representative who was from representing an orphan disease organization, and he said that very clearly that this exclusivity, it doesn't matter so much in our space. There is not so much have one producer, and if we're lucky, we can get that drug. And so in certain diseases, for sure, exclusivity doesn't solve the issue. We need other tools to solve the imbalance of the access to drugs. And that debate, I haven't really seen that. Like, what is the issue is being true. Clearly, we don't have the same access across Europe, but what can we do about it? And here, I think it's the wrong tool to solve this problem. Does that make sense?
Magda, it seems you wanted to react, or no?
I think that I could add so many other things, but I just wonder if if you want to move also to other, maybe just
Sure.
one item with these economic issues, because I think access is indeed super important, and we need to have we need to resolve it. The solution would not be through undermining incentives or their modulation, but there must be another solution. So we are calling already for many years to sit around the table together with member states, with payers, with healthcare authorities, to really have a dedicated conversation to what the fix will be. I would just like to say we reiterate that year after year. We couldn't do it, unfortunately, because there wasn't political appetite, and also because there was this rush for having this legislation on the table released as soon as possible. But it is time now to start doing that. There are also some other unintended consequences of some of the proposals that are on the table today. By, for example, trying to fix economic value of drugs too early in the process, we might end up not having them developed, because if you compare with the standard of care or with the cheapest comparator or with something else, you would actually stop innovation. And I say innovation not in the sense of expensive gadget, but new healthcare solutions that are necessary to improve patient quality of life, patient comfort and lives sometimes, just because there is a drug that exists. I can give you an example very concretely. There are diseases that can only be treated today through massive doses of steroids. You know what the impact of those steroids is on the body, but yes, there is a treatment that exists. It can stop or it can delay the disease, but the impact on the patient, it's horrible. So now, if you use unmet medical need definition as it is today in the different conversations to restrict access to fast track processes and to the markets in the future because of economic problems, and you forget about the patient and the patient need, if you look at economic value too early in the process, you would simply stop development of healthcare solutions and competition and having more solutions for the patients. So I think these are all unintended consequences. It's all well meant. It comes, hearts are in the right place. It's clearly a good intent, but the unintended consequences could be quite dramatic in Europe for the patients and for research.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We as well in the beginning talked about innovations, medicines of the future, technologies, technological development, fast technological development. Now we are on the edge of AI revolution. So the proposal also counts with a tool called regulatory sandbox, which could, let's say, create a zone for less strict operations, testing, and research. Do you think this could be one of the silver bullets? I start with Katrin.
I wouldn't call it a silver bullet. I would call it as a need. We need the flexibility. That's what I was trying to articulate. We can't always anticipate what's going to come next because it goes so fast. So there's also in part of what you said about, real world data, but also artificial intelligence. So we need to have a perspective that this will impact the way we currently, assess and develop drugs. So we need a kind of framework that will allow this flexibility. And just to add, it is not, to have less strict. It is very strict regulatory oversight. It's not to cut border. It is not seen like that at all. It's just to have a the development will allow whatever we don't know today. So that's all. We want to really stress this need because again, what we have today is very much asset development by, based on mechanism of action and so on. Patient need is so, as we said, we can do better, but what else can come, product that can act independently of just one target or just, that can, I can take the example of oncology and of targets that the product that we're addressing a target that is not disease specific. Okay, that took years with discussion with regulators, with the EFPIA national regulators, to find a way to get there, to get to the first approval. What is the evidence requirement to get there? But okay, we have this dialogue, we're getting there. But imagine another development in an area where we don't know where to start. So we need to have this framework for this dialogue and work together on how to develop those kind of products.
Thank you. Nikolai, how do you see this sandbox and this impact on, I would say, startups and smaller biotechs across Europe?
Well, I think it all depends on how it implements. I actually like the idea a lot. I think it could be the silver bullet that you're talking about, but it depends on how it's implemented. The proposal is still a bit vague about that, I think. But that bit together with the reduced timelines and the optimization of the regulatory systems, I think are actually some of the really good parts of the proposal. We had a lot of learnings during COVID, where we saw that regulators would really evaluate certain applications very fast. We saw rolling submissions for the first time in Europe with evaluation of data packages as they became available. We saw a regulatory system that really stretched itself, and it actually helped bring forward vaccines and treatments very fast. And that's obviously intention to learn from this and to implement those learnings in a rational way. I think that part is good. The sandbox, I'm cautiously optimistic. We leave it at that.
I am super optimistic about the sandbox, but I think Nikolai, it's completely right. The future proofing of the legislation, and the Commission has made a lot of very, very good proposals here. It's not just about the sandbox. The sandbox is needed because we need a place where we have doubts on which pathway should we follow, because there are many interlinked legislations, or there is a gap in the legislation, and we don't want to wait until we have a legislation, because you know how long it takes to put the legislation in place until we can actually develop something here in Europe. So it could be a massive competitive advantage and creating even a forefront innovation here in Europe if we do that. We are always asked, could you give me an example? Where please read the blog by Natalie Moll on this very subject, which gives some examples of where integrated technology products, which are have elements of devices, diagnostic, data, artificial intelligence, biological and chemical products, and it's not science fiction what I'm talking about, it's very, very within reach, would actually need a place where you would determine which of these pathways would actually take precedence, or which core of evidence would be necessary to develop those and get them safely to the patients. Because I think what Catherine said, and I think we would all say, safety, quality, and efficacy of products is paramount. That would not change. Whatever tool we use, whether it's an expedited pathway, whether it's the sandbox or something else, nobody would allow, and the regulators first, that anyone cuts the corners of safety, quality, and efficacy. So there is this perception, this myth, that if we do something faster, or that if we do something differently, that it means cutting corners, and it's not, because the legislation is not compromising on safety, quality, and efficacy of medicines. I think that's really important to remember. The process would not change that in any way. But then I'd like to highlight again what Nikolai said. It is about expedited pathways, which also sometimes are perceived quick and dirty. No, not at all dirty. Quick, maybe, certainly not dirty. Certainly with all the necessary standards. It is about rolling reviews or phased reviews, as they called now, which demonstrated their value during COVID, but not only during COVID. That is now also a practice that the regulators can do and do, but we can optimize it, and the sandbox. It's the combination of all those things that would make the European framework more competitive, or not more competitive, simply competitive and attractive for the innovators.
Many thanks. And now we are getting to the stage where possible questions from the audience are on the program. So I would like to invite you. Would you have a question, either physical guests or guests online, to our distinguished panelists? No questions from the audience here. Oh, please, madam. Please tell your name and the question. Thank
Yes,
you.
my name is Cecil. I work for Renew Europe on health. And I think there's no doubt on where Renew Europe stands on these questions. But just to play a little bit the devil's advocate, also to have maybe a more interesting discussion, because we all talk about access, and part of access is also affordability. So from the industry perspective, if we're going to keep at least the status quo on the IPR, what can we do in terms of ensuring affordability? Because I think part of the exercise we're doing is really to ensure that there will no longer be, a north-south, east-west divide in terms of what is actually available. And we all know that different member states has different capacity and different health budgets. So if we're not going to touch on the length of the patent protections and the data protection, what can we do instead? What are the good ideas? Is there something that's missing in the Commission proposal that you would have liked to have seen instead? So we can, look at both sides of the coins.
Thank you for the question. Catherine, would you like to react? What are the silver bullets?
I'm still thinking on how to best approach the response of it. Thank you for the question, honestly. I just struggle to respond because affordability is, I'm not so sure how to understand affordability. That's what I mean. For me, affordability is linked to how we quantify the value of the product. And I don't know whether we start with that, but as we explained, you cannot have just a value based on, the fact that it is based on existing comparator is something that, of course we have to take into consideration. Again, it's the area of basically how do you define it, whether the product is going to be transformational, whether the product is going to bring incremental improvement to the patient care. So there's a lot of factors that needs to be taken into consideration. Some of it are addressed in the legislation, but as I mentioned, the big concern is that it wouldn't be too restrictive, because then, the patient will be deprived of the improvement. So that's not what we want. And to me, it's not the transformational improvement that matters so much. It's the little one that we were discussing. The fact that, well, we want to improve the quality of life. We want to improve the drug administration, the regimen, the dosing. We want to have this possibility to do that. And being recognized, being allowed for that. And for now, the right is there in practice. We do not want that. So it is a complex question, of course, but I don't know if you intend to, your thinking was affordability in terms of also pricing of the product, and that's not the comment. But for me, it is more around how you bring the value to the patient and how you make it recognized. Yes, there's a priority medicine designation that is included in the legislation, and I'm super happy with that. The fact that it may allow even a better dialogue with the regulators on how we develop products. So the link for that to the affordability or to enhance access is not there yet. Is it something that we should enhance? That's where we should focus. Yes, maybe
Yeah, I'm happy to comment too. I think my simple answer to that is that it's probably not in this legislation that we should fix absolutely every problem on earth. That's my simple answer. And I think that affordability, access and affordability are super important. And there are solutions proposed, but there is no forum to discuss them. Equity-based tier pricing, differential price. There are many innovative pricing models. There are many solutions that have been proposed that are on the table. And thank you for your question, by the way, because I think we sometimes conflate everything and confuse everything. There are proposals from different parties, but this legislation is not going to solve them. We need to have another place where we can solve that urgently. We need to sit around the table, look at these models, and to see what can work where. That's really important. So you say, what is the solution? There are proposals, but trying to do that within this legislation, whose aim is different, I think would only create more confusion and would not help us to achieve both access and supporting continued research. We sometimes say balancing innovation versus access as if these were there was a dichotomy there. There isn't. This is part of healthcare. We both need access, affordability, and we need continued research and continued innovation so that patients can have what they need, not what they deserve, as some people say, but what they need. And the patient need shouldn't be driven out of what we can afford, but should be driven out of what is their medical condition, how it can be prevented, cured, treated, right? But then affordability is an important component of this discussion. But why should it be in this legislation, and why should it be connected to something that it's not really connected? I think that's my response to your question. So yes, but elsewhere and urgently.
The answer, and Nikolai, please.
Yeah, because I completely agree. We have to solve the right problem with the right tool. And I think that what Magda says is very on point. And most of the problem is trying to be solved with the right tool here. And I'm not sure that that's the right way of doing it. I think it's the wrong way of doing it. We have these huge discrepancies in people are paying in taxes across Europe and what social benefits they get. We also have a huge discrepancy of wealth, and therefore the affordability question is not solved by regulating access to this centralized tool. There are a number of different pricing models, as Magda also touched upon, that are being discussed right now. I know that in Denmark they discuss rebate models, price volume models, capping models, subscription models, payment on effect, or rate payment models, or indication-based price models. There are tons of different price models, and that is probably a discussion that would be more suitable to solving that particular issue. We have already agreed upon a common HTA methodology in Europe, but not on national equity now. And that's a political discussion when that is going to be done.
Many thanks for answering this question. Is there other question? Yes, sir, please.
Thank you very much, Matthias Heck with Alexion. I think when we're talking about this legislation, a lot of important things have been said, and something that came up in the discussion around the unmet needs. There are questions which are of relevance from a government perspective, or from a physician perspective, but certainly from a patient perspective, and that is something that is immensely important. And since we're here in the house of the liberals, I think not everything can be solved through legislation, for sure. And then I think what's very important is to look at what is it that the patients are asking for. And the topic of the rare diseases came up already, and something where I really do believe the EU can help, because we always talk about what can be solved where, and where is a real benefit from the EU perspective. One of the things that the rare disease patient community is asking for is an EU action plan for rare diseases. So that is certainly something whereby, also to your question, support can be given to member states, that because it's not all about a question of money, but it's also about a question of best practice sharing. It's about a lot of things, and to use that opportunity here, and we've seen positive examples, from another space with a European beating cancer plan, and something like this. This is what could help, and I think now that we're moving into an election with a new European Parliament, a new European Commission, those are exactly those opportunities where this action can be taken. Thank you.
Thank you for saying that. I think it's really important, and that just shows also how important the future proofing of the legislation is. And so let's take the case of rare diseases. If we continue doing research and just tweaking the edges a little bit here or there, just optimizing clinical trials for small populations and looking at how we can accelerate advanced therapies, we are still doing one by one research on each disease. It would still take us 200 years before we can address them all. And we need to change the paradigms. And if you want to change the paradigms, we need to join forces. We need to have a place where everybody can collaborate, the regulators, the innovators, the payers, the patients, the academia. That's a huge collaborative effort. And I think some of the trends that we see in the legislation is that we are looking at today's problems. We are not necessarily projecting ourselves in a place which is completely different, where we are looking at diseases differently, where we are looking at where science drives us rather than where policy drives us, because policy and science sometimes do not follow the same paths and the same speed, as you know. So I think that's why it's so important that we have many various tools for resolving many various problems. We need action plans. We need the legislation that would help investors to see the long term. We need the legislation that helps regulators to have the flexibility that they need, but also the tools that they need in order to execute the decisions that are made. I think all of that, it's necessary, but we cannot resolve everything in just one place. We should resolve as much as we can, what can be fixed through that legislation, but we cannot hope that everything, including an action plan for rare diseases, would be addressed through this legislation, right?
Nikolai, would you like to react?
No, I would disagree. We need to have the right legislation to fix the right problem. And, I agree on what the problem is that we want to fix, and then basically target the solution to that problem. If we want to use other tools, then that the Commission currently doesn't have a mandate for, which especially deals with national budgeting and so forth, then that should be part of a political discussion whether they should have that. But using a bad tool to fix a problem is not the right way.
And Katrin?
And just part on rare disease, and especially breast cancer, I was privileged to also be part of a lot of discussion on that. I can tell you, it starts with the alignment in doing the proper clinical trials. And the European Reference Center that have been created are just amazing. We have to build on that. We have to build on the fact that the cooperation is the most important things for those type of disease. And then, of course, bring all the stakeholders together. But we know this, and it's not, recently only that, this is the topic of interest. It's not only the methodology, as you mentioned, Magda, but it's the collaboration, but it's also, understanding the proper way to engage to try to bring a drug to this small population. And it is not easy, but we have to start together. So again, I don't think this legislation will be specifically helpful for that, but we have to continue to fight for that, because otherwise we'll never do this progress. I mean, the discussion has been ongoing for some time. But if the proper framework are in place and the willingness to try to collaborate is there, absolutely, we have to go forward.
Thank you. I think we spoke a lot about future proofing, etc. But there are also other items that currently in the public debate are picking up, and some of these are, for example, the simplifications that have been proposed by the Commission of the processes and of the committees. So there is again a perception. Let me just throw it into the mix because we seem to be very consensual. So let's try on that one. There is a very good Commission proposal from our perspective of simplifying the committee structure. Why? Because when you have something completely new, you need to create a committee to create also the capability. But once we've acquired sufficient level of expertise, of knowledge, of experience, then we go back to the main committee and we bring all the conversations together in order to avoid big fragmentation. I think that was the thinking behind the proposal of the European Commission to decrease the number of committees. And there seemed to be a suspicion in the debate, and we saw some amendments coming in to actually recreate the committees and to create fragmentation. Why is it a bad, good idea? Well, it is again, the intent is we want to make sure that we create this capability and that we maintain this capability. The reality is that we cannot fragment and silo. We need to have all of these discussions together, hence the simplification. And there was an outcry about it and an attempt to recreate many more committees, which actually delays the processes and delays the acquisition of the same body of knowledge by everybody. And Nikolai is an ex-regulator, so he would contradict me if I'm saying rubbish. But I think that we need to be very careful about unintended consequences of some proposals. They come from a suspicion and lack of trust. And I think it's by asking questions, talking and having dialogue like the one we have today, that we can reassure and that the regulators can reassure and that the European Commission would be able to reassure as well. So cutting corners should be off the table because there are so many mechanisms in the legislation and even in the current legislation and even more so in the future legislation that would not allow that to happen.
Many thanks for this reaction. Actually, we are getting with the time over the dedicated schedule. So I would like to ask our distinguished panelists, maybe the last conclusive question. We have been talking about the gaps. We have seen and heard a number of concrete points, recommendations. I have noted almost 2 pages. What would be, let's say, 1 or 2 most important thing that the EU policymakers should do now, address in the legislation, or even someone else, especially when we see the global pharma and biotech landscape, what we could, let's say, learn or start doing when we look to other successful areas like, for example, US or the South Asia. So what would be the potential, as we would say, silver bullet, 1 or 2? Catherine, over to you.
A pleasure. Thank you so much. So for me, it will be definitely around the discussion of maybe defining, giving a designation to innovation and build on that for the expedited reviews. I see what's going on in the US, but not only in the US, we have to be very conscious that so many health authorities are collaborating in that effort. Any designation for priority medicine enhance reduce the time for approval, but enhance also access to patients. So honestly, this is an area that is a must. We need to keep that if we want to stay competitive among the other regions. And then the other one would be the prioritization and allocation of adequate resource in all the member states. And of course, like I said, I have a lot of credit with all the regulators I've been working with. It's just an incredible work, but it's too much complexity coming their way for now. It's too much to handle. Honestly, like I said, the regulations that are not aligned, the clinical trial, it's too many things, the devices. I mean, we need to find a way to simplify, to continue to do so, and help on prioritization. And of course, learn together. We have to be in there together. Of course. Thank you.
Many thanks. And Nikolai, what are your recommended silver bullets? Thank you.
Well, I I think it should be rescued. I think we should make sure that we can close some of the gap that we're seeing towards Asia and Europe. So I think an innovation focus is strongly needed. I really agree with that. And then just, use the right tools to fix the right problems. Don't use the wrong tools. And finally, just I agree with Magda on the committee. Well proposed, that's a good proposal in the legislation, having worked with the EMA. I know that the simplification would be welcome. It wouldn't stay the focus on open reaction, and they would be used as working parties within this EFPIA structure, and that makes it really a lot of sense to. We don't need more committees, we need fewer, and we need more agile systems. And I think that part of the also is so that's what my final word.
Very practical recommendations. And now, Magda, over to you.
It's difficult to add anything to that because everything's been said, but let's remember why we need to do innovation in Europe, why it matters for the European patients, economy, and research ecosystem. And for doing that, let's remember about future-proofing. Let's remember about simplification. Let's remember about incentives, be it the TV for antibiotics or the regulatory data protection or accelerated procedures. And let's address the question of affordability where it belongs in a dedicated discussion as soon as possible. Thank you.
Many thanks. I would like to thank to all three panelists, Nikolai, Brun, Magda Chelbus, and Dr. Catherine Weil. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a pleasure to host you here at the ALDE headquarters for today's economy debate on medicines innovations in Europe. And on behalf of ALDE, we are looking forward to invite you for next debate in the time that will be dedicated to important European economy issues. Once again, many thanks for being here with us physically and online. And let me wish you a good day and Merry Christmas. Many thanks.